Hello, and welcome to Regrets I've Had a Few. I'm Paul Hunter, Artistic Director of Told by an Idiot, and this is a podcast where I talk to friends and colleagues delving into what made them the person they are today.
Hello, and welcome. My guest this month is a writer with a unique voice and a captivating theatrical imagination. A long-term member of the extraordinary Cornish theatre collective Knee High, his work has been seen across 3 continents, and he has most recently been collaborating with us idiots on his own wonderful adaptation of the classic horror comedy, The Cat and the Canary. Welcome, Carl Gross.
Hello, Mr. Hunter. Thank you for having me.
Hello, Carl. This is obviously rather strange because I'm sitting in the rehearsal room at Chichester, which is now empty, as
Yes.
everyone's gone over for tech. And it feels like some strange horror thing is going to come and attack me while I'm doing this Zoom, but I'm sure of that. I'm sure it won't. Anyway, more of horror later. Carl, it's wonderful having you with us. Thank you so much. I'm going to start, as I always do with my guests, and I'm going to take you right back, if I may, to your first live theatrical experience. What did you see? Where was it? Was it with family or at school? How did it all start?
Yeah, I think the big one that I can remember is of course Knee High. I remember seeing them. Me being from Cornwall, Knee High was, part and parcel of the cultural landscape, and I think if I was 13, I think I went to see a show called The Last Voyage of Long John Silver, and we went with our school in the old Truro Town Hall, which is now the Hall for Cornwall. But it used to be this big old barn of a place, very old kind of creaky hall. And I think we went on a matinee for school. And I think I'd heard of Knee High. I sort of, you sort of knew of them, but that was definitely the first one that I saw, and I guess the first show that I remember. And it was very interesting. I absolutely loved it. And of course, I didn't know who anyone was at the time or anything like that. I just went to see it. When I eventually got to meet a few years later Mr. Mike Shepherd, founder of Knee High, I said, "Oh, my first show was The Last Voyage of Long John Silver." And he went, "No, that one's very good, that one." But it was brilliant, and it was this really strange sort of. It was about Long John Silver, sort of, but I mean, I can only remember sort of certain characters, and there's a few things I remember, sort of that really affected me. One was that in the interval, I bought a can of Lilt from
Pineapple Crush, as I kind of think of it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I bought a can of Lilt, and we got back to our seats, and I didn't get to open my can of Lilt until after the lights went down and part 2 had started. I'm going somewhere with this because it was a sort of formative moment, and I was like, "Oh God, I haven't opened it." So I tried to open it really quietly. The part 2 had started. And I opened the can, and of course it was absolutely in a moment of the one moment of pure silence, and all of the actors in this big, there were a couple of hundred people watching, and I went, and all of the actors, these Knee High players, all stopped and turned out into the audience and looked at me, and the audience laughed. And I guess I cite that as the first time I was in a Knee High show, because they all kind of stared at me, and that was. Even though it was a sort of a silly moment, I kind of went, "Oh, they can do that. They kind of looked at me. That's like, they didn't ignore it. So that was sort of lesson 1. And the other amazing thing in the show was at the end, there was this, it was all set on this island, I think. And there was this big countdown to a kind of an atomic explosion. And Long John Silver, I think it was him at the end, there was this big, huge explosion. And then on stage, I'm remembering this sort of in well, there's probably a lot more imagination going on in this than I remember. I'm sort of remembering it with much more kind of bells and whistles on it. But this character was standing on stage, and this giant skeleton hand, which was bigger than him, suddenly, you hadn't seen this before in any of the show, came from out behind the cross arch, came across the stage and grabbed him and sort of dragged him off stage. And I couldn't believe that they had that idea existed, and also that they had hidden this giant kind of puppet hand with the whole kind of show, and that it happened, and that really blew my mind. And I remember fighting heavily for a moment in a show that I wrote called Dead Dog in a Suitcase for Knee High, where at the end, I don't know if you remember, but there was the end of the world, and then there was this giant skeletal dog that sort of, the dog has been sort of traced through the show, gets killed at the beginning, and then you see it in various puppet forms, and then it had this thing, and I had to really fight for that because it was hard to design, and it was expensive. But I kept going back to that moment when I said, look, it's really about when I first saw Knee High. I want some kid out there to go, whoa, look at that sort of image. And it all came from that Long John Silver moment of just, knowing that they had hidden this thing, and it was this surprise they'd kept at the end to kind of blow you all away. Yeah.
Well, that's a brilliant early memory. And what a theatrical encounter it was. And obviously we'll talk later about Knee High and your brilliant work with them. But yes, that's I can totally understand why opening the can of Lilt was a big theatrical.
That's all it took. Was
exactly.
A can of Lilt.
Opening the can of Lilt set you on your track to. That's how. Yes, we'll return to that. So you grew up in Cornwall, of course. And was there any sense of theatre or show business in the family at all?
No. My dad was a motorcycle mechanic, and my mum worked in a kind of residential home when I was a kid, and a waitress and sort of care assistant. Yeah, so they were very very, very non-theatrical. My dad often said that my granddad, his dad, who I never met, was very theatrical. But I mean, in a way that I think he spent a lot of time in the pubs of Truro and. My dad often said, "Oh, you'll like him. You'll like him." That's like, all right.
The mystery of your grandfather.
I know, yeah, who I never met, but apparently he could, he was very sort of
tell a tale, I imagine.
Yeah, exactly.
As indeed you do, rather brilliantly. But I suppose I'm interested. At 13, you see this brilliant Knee High version of Robert Louis Stevenson and classic. At what point does I assume performing comes first before writing? Was it a desire to perform?
No. I mean, I had latched into writing in primary school. I remember the last year of primary school. I mean, this is only kind of looking back on it, but I in the last year of primary school, I remember my first sort of moment where I couldn't stop writing, and it was a story. It was a short story.
What was it called?
I can't remember. I can't remember what it was, but again, it was another of those wonderful moments. I think like possibly all of us have who do this sort of stuff. I was blessed with a very astute, observant teacher who kind of, this is only looking back on it, but Mr. Butchart was his name. He was in the final class of primary school, and we had to just write a story. I can't remember what it was, but I remember not being able to stop. I just couldn't stop. And he said, "Okay, pencils down. We're now going to move on to, we're going to do some maths now." And I sort of went, "Oh," like that. And he put his hand on my shoulder and went, "You can carry on, Carl." So even then, he knew that I was a horrific overwriter, and desperately wanted to kind of carry on. So I often thank him for that. He spotted it more quicker than I did, actually.
Also, what a wonderful, simple gesture to make. A very simple thing of you can carry on, Carl. That's a brilliant way of encouraging. And I love the idea that you wrote and couldn't stop. I think that's a fantastic. So writing's there from a very early stage. I suppose at what point did you think, "Oh, is this something I could do professionally, writing / performing, whatever"? What was the journey? Did you go away to college or to study, or how did that next step happen?
Yeah, well, I was really, a number of things converged, I suppose. I was really into writing, and I like I said, it wasn't theatre hadn't come into my head really at that point, but I was reading a lot of Stephen King, as a kid, and I thought I'd want to be like Stephen King. I want to write sort of horror novels, and that he was sort of, and still is, a huge inspiration. I suppose really what I really got into was cinema. So I was, as a kid, reading that sort of stuff, watching things I really shouldn't have been watching, and that was a real inspiration. And I wanted to make films. I was sort of very interested in the idea of I'd like to write and and make my own films. But when I got to, and I also did drama. I did GCSE drama and met some mates in secondary school. When I got to sixth form, when there was theatre studies, it was really, I mean, there was no film courses or anything really when I was sort of back then. There was one or two, and I tried to get into a couple of them, but didn't manage to. But weirdly, when I was doing theatre studies, I was kind of like, well, I can write something, and I can direct something, and I can get some friends together and we can tell this story, but it's just not with cameras. It's sort of this thing called theatre. So I started doing that really in sixth form, and I wrote my first play, which was called Bile, which, when I was about 16, they had this brilliant sort of it wasn't part of the class really. It was a extracurricular thing, and so if you wanted to, you could ask and write your own thing, and they gave you, I think, 50 quid budget. And so that was the first play I wrote, and I really loved it. And so that was the beginning of writing for theatre. And then at the same time, I was in things, and then me and my friends formed a little theatre company in Truro, and I would then write something every summer, and we would all, a cast of sometimes 20, 30 of us, we'd all mooch around from books and village halls, and just turn up, and no one would come and see it, but we just did these shows for nothing, around the village halls of around Cornwall. Sorry.
It sounds like some wonderful kind of Cornish commedia troupe travelling through Mavagissey and all of these places. I like with more people on stage than in the hall.
It was
I like that.
that.
So inevitably, we returned to Knee High after your the experience with the Can of Lilt and the Skeleton Hand. How and when were you invited to join the company? What were the circumstances?
Well, I was doing A-level theatre studies, and the RSC did a brilliant youth theatre project across the whole country, which was called the Antigones Project. So they were doing the Greek plays, and they split the UK down into 6 regions. Cornwall was one of them. And each region would get a local director and a local playwright and students from all the different, sixth form colleges doing theatre studies. 1 or 2 would be chosen to join this big group, and then we would make a piece of theatre inspired by Antigone, which is, a play about youth versus authority. And it had to be, the brief was, it had to be about where you're from. So there was Cornwall, there was London, Scotland, Solihull, bizarrely, was the other region.
I can't imagine there's much youth.
I was invited by my teacher. Yeah.
No, I was about to say, I can't imagine there was much youth against authority going on in Solihull, but I could be wrong. Anyway, back to Cornwall. Back to Cornwall.
So I was lucky enough, and another great teacher nominated me. I really didn't want to do it. I was very shy. I was really didn't want to go off and on my own to do this big year-long sort of project, but I did do it. And our director and writer, our director was Mike Shepherd, who founded Knee High, and our playwright was Nick Dark. And I was just getting to know them, and I'd seen Nick's play that Nick had just started working with Knee High.
Sure.
He'd come back from London, and they'd done Ting Tang Mine, and they were starting to do very exciting things. So that was all kind of snowballing as an interest for me. So I got to kind of meet them, and then we did this brilliant series of workshops over a period of months, and then Nick wrote this play called Hell's Mouth, a sort of brilliant comedic satire about Cornwall set in the future.
I have to now admit, I didn't know where this was heading. I saw Hell's Mouth.
Really?
Yes.
What, back in ages ago?
Oh, maybe it was a revival then, because when I joined Knee High for the first time in the year 2000, so 24 years ago, and I took over in the Red Shoes.
Yeah.
There was a version of Hell's Mouth, because I remember Mike on a motorbike coming over a quarry, but that obviously was a revival of the original. I assume.
That was a revival. They did a kind of landscape theatre version of it. So this one, we're talking like 92 here. I've still got a T-shirt. Wow. Yeah, so we did it in 1992. Got the T-shirt, but and it was this wonderful kind of piece of youth theatre about Cornwall, and we did it, toured it around Cornwall, and took it to the other place in Stratford upon Avon, and as well, and we saw all the other shows as well. So it was a wonderful thing, and that's where I met Nick. And I was starting to write. I'd written my first play, that Bile, and I'd given that to him to read, and he was very lovely and enthusiastic about that. And I think, I didn't quite know this, but I think they liked me. Mike liked me, and so when I then went on to form my own little theatre company, and we were doing our own shows, I had written a play called Scorched, which was about sort of probably inspired by Hell's Mouth, really. It was about Cornwall, and the ice caps had melted, and Cornwall was now an island, and it was this weird. There was the last surviving members of Cornwall hanging onto this pinnacle of rock. And the last show, Nick and Mike came to see it, and at the end, Mike came backstage, and he said, "Oh, that was really great." And I went, "Oh, cool." And he said, "Yeah, we're doing Nick's new play, The King of Prussia." And I went, "Oh yeah." And he said, "Yeah, and somebody's dropped out, and we're looking for someone." And I said, "Oh yeah." I said, "Well, I'll keep an eye out."
Put the word out.
Yeah, exactly. And he said, No. What about if you do it? And I was like, "What?" I was like, "Oh God!" And I just started to go to Dartington College of Arts, so I'd just done this first year. Anyway, needless to say, I left Dartington College of Arts and joined Knee-High, and that was the first show, really. That's how it. So it came out of the youth theatre show, and knowing Nick, and and meeting Mike, and all that.
And then the incredible journey began, and as you say there, the kind of your relationship with Nick Dark, and that ongoing relationship, and I imagine in the early days some brilliant mentoring that was going
absolutely.
on.
Yeah.
And then, as I just mentioned, my first encounter with Knee-High, actually it wasn't my first. My first encounter with Knee-High was when I auditioned for a Nick Dark play, The Riot, at the National.
Yes, right, yeah.
And I didn't get it, and Mike was directing. I often remind Mike of this, but anyway, I didn't hold it against him. But Emma and Mike then invited me to go down and join the company of the Red Shoes, and we did it in the Acorn? No, what's that theatre?
Well, I remember that's where I first met you. You didn't even rehearse it in Mevagissey in the Jubilee Hall.
We did, and I'm coming back to our first meeting. And you were touring a version of the Three Little Pigs, I think, at the time.
Oh yeah, we also yeah.
And then you came and watched a run through, and we met. And I think we obviously retired to the local pub, probably one that your late grandfather had inhabited. Yes. And we really clicked. I think even then, we were talking about movies and various things. And then of course our paths. You were always in. And also, indeed, writing some extraordinary work for Knee-High, the Tristan and Isolde, the Bacchae. I'm remembering Cymbeline, of course, which you were in, and you adapted from the Shakespeare. And obviously that starred our wonderful friend and colleague, Haley, Carmichael, who set the edits up with me, and he's currently in Captain the Canary, more of that in a moment. But I'm remembering you telling me that some audiences in Stratford weren't so happy with how you'd adapted Believe. And it just, because it wasn't a straightforward version. I loved it. I thought it was a wonderful production. But you did make me laugh when you told me about how some of the audiences reacted. And it reminded me of a film which I love, the great Ernst Lubitsch movie, To Be or Not to Be, set in 1942. When the Germans have invaded Poland, and it's all set within a Polish theatre company. And one of the actors is full of vanity, and another character says to him at one point, "What the Germans have done to Poland, you have done to Shakespeare."
That is literally what I won't say what was written down, because it's a bit disgusting, but that we did receive some feedback cards from our audience
along those lines,
and I was very much along those lines, but a little bit more sort of kind of
we don't need to go. We don't need to go there. And however, of course, our paths then run parallel. And occasionally I'd be invited to be in a Knee-High show. We'd hook up again. Yeah. And then I remember we were invited as the Idiots to do a version of Beauty and the Beast at the Lyric. And at that point, I thought, actually, it'd been great to work with Carl, and brilliantly you were up for it. And we collaborated with a wonderful company, Lisa Hammond playing Beauty, Javier Marthan as Heineken the dog, I seem to remember. And that was the beginning of a collaborative relationship, I suppose, which brings me to the question, because of course you brilliantly collaborate with Knee-High, you collaborate with us, but you also write very, very brilliant individual plays, which is you. How do you find that balance between something more collaborative and something more singularly driven by you?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the plays they're more personal. They're certainly much more difficult. You know, they take kind of 10 times longer to write, and I kind of love them because they are a challenge. They are, you know, I really love creating original stuff. But as you know, it's great fun to take something that pre-exists and find your own shows, as we're doing with Cat and the Canary. Our show feels like a new show, but it's like we do have you know, my adaptation of John Willard's original play, which, you know, provides a kind of foundation at least. But with the plays, it's you know, you are having to create that foundation as well, so it does take longer. But I suppose I find an outlet through those plays for talking about Cornwall and identity and my family. I suppose they're just a bit more personal, really, and kind of a different kind of world to explore in a way. Yeah.
And I adore those plays that you've written, and obviously the relationship with Simon Stokes at Plymouth was where I encountered him, and a strong, brilliant, strong relationship between the two of you, director, writer, and I remember being invited into a workshop on your Grand Guignol, which was wonderful, and I suppose what I always loved in those plays, and indeed when I collaborate with you, is a kind of fierce poetic anarchy that runs through a lot of what you write, which I like, and it's always often very funny. And I suppose it brings me to a late Nihai show, which is one of my personal favorites, which you mentioned, Dead Dog in a Suitcase, which was a reworking of the Beggar's Opera. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And I just thought it was such a brilliant sort of political, kind of quite moral work in a way. It was quite interesting, but wildly theatrical, and I just wondered how you approached reimagining the John Gray original with that, because it felt like such a unique piece of work when I saw it on stage.
Yeah, I mean, that one was a very important show for me in terms of Nihai, because it was I had, you know, I wrote my own plays, and then in Nihai I also kind of, if I was in a village hall, I did a lot of the village hall shows with Mike, which were very anarchic and, you know, just three people on the road. And I would just provide a kind of, you know, a structure. I'd write bits, or we'd all write bits, you know. Then I would write a lot of stuff for Emma as well, which was always very bespoke to her production. She would have the story or the folk tale or whatever, and I would go away and write stuff. But Dead Dog was really kind of important, I think, for me, because it felt like a kind of colliding of writing for Nihai, but also writing for myself and writing those plays. So I was given, you know, I kind of asked, I said I would love much more time to write something, because time is what we have, and I don't need to write this in sort of a manic 6 weeks before rehearsals. If I had more time to write it, I feel like I could really develop the world. And it was, you know, the Beggar's Opera is a musical, so it was the first time really that I had to kind of figure out how to write with lyrics as well. I mean, I'd done one or two songs in there, but there was like 45 songs in the show. I think some of them, you know, maybe 2 or 3 lines, but it was, but it was a really thrilling and really sort of brilliantly nerve-wracking experience, because Charles Hazelwood, who came to us with the project, he wanted to compose it, and he knew the Beggar's Opera inside out, and he didn't know really, you know, he was like, well, this is new to me. And I said, I've never written this amount of lyrics before, but we really, in the spirit of let's just go for it, we kind of went for it.
You really went for it, Carl. Trust me, I saw it a couple of times, and and I think that's one of the things I loved about it. And the same to Mike, I think, wonderfully directed by Mike as well. And
yeah, absolutely.
And I suppose another thing, which brings me to Cat and the Canary, I think one of the great things about your writing is I think actors really love your writing. I can see it in the room as we've been working this, and the
Right.
space for people to play, and the opportunities for them to play within what you've written. Do you think you, having spent almost many years performing, has influenced that, or not? I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I mean, the big piece of advice, I mean, I was already doing it, but the big piece of advice Nick Dart gave me was you got to be an actor before you can write plays. And it just happened. That's the way it kind of, it fell.
out.
But yeah. And I kind of write stuff that I would want to, when I'm writing, I do act it out. I kind of, you want to make sure that it's fun for people to play, and that it has a rhythm, and it's give people particular moments and things like that.
Well, it's interesting.
Yeah, it's definitely.
Two things about that. Coming back to the great Ernst Lubitsch, apparently when he made all his films, he would demonstrate to the cast exactly how he wanted it played in the scene. So he would play every character to Jimmy Stewart, Shop Around the Corner, and all this always makes me laugh. But it brings me to a little question around regrets, tying with our title. Do you have any regrets about not performing anymore, or is that a thing of the past now?
I do a bit, and there's a period when I sort of stopped, and I was like, I very much enjoyed, just writing, and I think I really love writing, and it's kind of what I do now. But I do just recently I've sort of gone, I just sort of had a little, maybe I could, because I was actually offered a part in my own play over the summer. I wrote a play called The Kneebone Cadillac, and we did
I'm glad you didn't have to audition. That would have been even harder.
Well, maybe anyway. I might have actually. I did actually audition to play myself in a radio play. Brilliant Claire Grove, radio producer. I said, well, obviously I'd written myself into this radio play called 49 Donkeys Sang. And she said, well, I presume, who are we going to get to play you? And I said, well, I mean, I could do it. And she went, well, you might have to audition. I think she was pulling my leg, but it was a bit of a.
You got there in the end.
I got there in the end, yeah. But I almost was in Kneebone, and I really, I thought that'd be brilliant. But it's the kind of logistics of it were a bit tricky. But but that was the first time I realised I was like, oh, maybe I should just have a little.
Yeah. Well, you've now obviously piqued my interest, Carl. So I'll have to have a think. Carl, it's been great chatting. I'd like to end our episode in a particular way, which kind of revels in your love of horror from an early age, and indeed mine. We've probably watched I'm a bit older, but similar times films we shouldn't see. One of which I remember watching when I was about 10, perhaps, was Nick Rogue's film Don't Look Now, which scared the bejesus out of me when I was. I've always said the thing that scared me most in that film wasn't the little figure in the red Macintosh and some of the more overt horror. What really frightened me was the two women, the two older English women, one of whom is blind, and she says she can see the dead girl, and that really freaked me out. Anyway,
likewise.
I'd like to finish with a little horror quiz for you, if I may.
Okay. Blimey. All right.
The 7 questions. I've tried to mix them up a bit, but here we go. Question number 1, we're starting with Nick Rogue. Nick Rogue's masterpiece, Don't Look Now, is based on a short story by which famous Cornish-related author?
Daphne du Maurier.
Correct. The terrifying movie The Babadook was written and directed by which Australian artist?
Jennifer Kent.
Correct. These are too easy, Carl. What is the name of the character Shelley Duvall plays in The Shining?
Wendy Torrance.
Correct. In Jacques Tournier's 1942 extraordinary film Cat People, the central character comes from which European country?
Oh, God, I was going to watch this at the weekend because I haven't seen it for a while. France?
No, Serbia. I'm glad we caught you out with one, Carl. We couldn't have a clean streak. Which 2 actors star in the 1982 remake of Cat People?
Oh, Natasha Kinski.
Yes.
I haven't seen it. There's another one I should say. Natasha Kinski, I know, is in it, and it's no. I want to say Susan Sarandon, but she's in The Hunger. No,
and I'll have to give it you. Malcolm McDowell.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah, I didn't know that.
It's worth a look. It's not as good as the original, but it's worth a look.
Yeah.
What instruction did Alfred Hitchcock give to audiences before they saw his seminal film Psycho?
God.
He gave an instruction to.
Yeah.
Well, I think you're. There's two things. I'll give you a point for what you're about to say. I think. Say what you're about to say.
Sweating now, falls on.
You were about to say you couldn't what?
Say that again, sorry.
Sorry, you were about to say they couldn't.
Oh, they couldn't leave. Was it?
No,
they couldn't leave.
He said
we'll
two
talk
things.
About the ending.
Yes. Please don't reveal the ending is one.
Yeah.
And the other stipulation was it is required that you see Psycho from the very beginning.
Oh, okay. Yes, of course. Yeah.
And finally, in Told by an Idiot and Chichester Theatre's co-production of your wonderful adaptation of The Cat and Canary, which character says, "Thank God you're alive"?
That is Susan Silsby, isn't it?
Correct. When
her niece,
when she comes out of the secret passageway. That's all I'm giving away, listeners.
Yeah,
about
no more spoilers.
Canary. No more spoilers. Carl, it's been wonderful chatting. Thank you so much. I will see you in about 10 minutes' time as we go into start our technical rehearsal. But thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you, Paul. Great stuff.
Cheers, mate. All the best.
Dear listeners, if you've enjoyed this idiot podcast, please spread the word